Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Cuitlahuac from Mexican Excellence. Hi, beautiful family. Tonight, I'm going to talk about a very important question that I have been receiving, and it is about how do I identify on the US Census for 2020? It's really, really important to get into this because as a historian, as someone who has studied this for over 20 years, it's important to put a lot of things into perspective. I am going to share with you a perspective that is not commonly known because it is not being pushed by mainstream media, whether that is Spanish-speaking, Univision, Telemundo, nor English-speaking channels. So let's dive into the topic. And before I continue, please make sure to subscribe to this channel. Also, I want to make sure that you're aware that I also have a Facebook page, an Instagram page, and I post a lot more topics on there. So for tonight's topic, how do I identify on the US Census? And perhaps let's ask another question. Why do we identify on the census on a certain topic? So for myself personally, I grew up knowing, right, that I am Mexican, Chicana. I grew up all over LA, and that is to say, Cudahy, Bell Gardens, Watts, Compton, South LA, and that is my upbringing, right? So I have families all over Long Beach, Compton, Watts, all over Rosarito, Baja California, Oregon, all over. So growing up, we're not told, we're not taught our history, neither are Mexicans in Mexico, because the education system of Mexico is not pro-indigenous, is not pro-inclusion, right? And I say that because from my understanding of history in Mexico, the Spaniards whom invaded Mexico and killed 95% of the population, they took on the power structure. And even though they fought for independence of Mexico, they did not fight for the independence of all Mexican people at that time, indigenous people, and all the diversity and complexities of those identities. They were simply looking to become independent as a new colonial power that had no connection to the Spanish crown. So much what happened to the United States when they were seeking independence from England, right? And all of that, that also happened to Mexico. And the Mexicans that continue to be in power under the new national identity of Mexican were all Spanish Criollo descent. So yes, there have been some indigenous folks that make it to the power structure of Mexico, but the majority of them are not of indigenous ancestry or indigenous themselves. So we have to get into that, right? We have to understand that the education system in Mexico does not talk about that. It's a very pro-Spanish, very pro-European, very pro-whitening up of Mexico, which was the national motto that many countries in Latin America took on in this whole history of colonization and this whole version of history and civilization and progress as a very white ideal that was manifested in this concept of modernity and saving the race or bettering the race of these brown people in Latin America. So I will get into another video when I talk about that. But it's important to get into that because us as Mexicans, and I'm talking about my experience as a Mexican in Los Angeles, California, learning her history starting about 20 years ago. So this has been a journey. So what I'm sharing with you right now, it took me 20 years of activism, of challenges, of journeys, of transformation, of confrontations, of all these issues, right? So I'm faced with the US Census. Very problematic. The US Census is very problematic. We know that it's been through its changes, its revisions, but ultimately my biggest problem with the US Census is that it groups, right? And it tries to flatten out the complexity and diversity among brown people who speak Spanish, right? That is what it is. The US Census does not group brown people that speak English and have English surnames into a subcategory of Britannics. That is understood, that is known. And the reason why the term Latino and Hispanic are so powerful is because they're used as a marketing tool, as a marketing scheme to try to homogenize, try to flatten out, try to blend us into this non-existent unit of culture. So when they market products to our communities, when they market items to our community, they make it seem like, oh, all Latinos are the same and y'all speak Spanish and you have English, Spanish surnames. But the reality is that the history behind that process and that product was very, very racist. It has to do with genocide. It has to do with wiping out of 95% of the original people that are on their continent. From there on, the 5% that survive comes into the new national models of white supremacy that start popping up all over Mexico, first and foremost, and then all over Latin America. And then hence here we are, what are known as the mestizos. So let's go back to the US Census. The problem I have with the US Census is that it categorizes Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, all of us under the generic model and identity of Latino. It asks you, oh, are you, what type of Latino are you, right? And it puts us all under this category. And yes, they're identifying that Latino is not a race, right? It is a different cultural identity. They can't even call it an ethnicity, but it somehow works in their logic, right? Of, oh, let's just group all these people under this category. And after you respond to that question, it takes you on to the race question. Now, let me go back. Let's get into the concept of race. That will be another video. But what I want to talk about is that the concept of race, as I have studied it, as I support the interpretations given by Aníbal Quijano, who is a social critic who has already passed about 2 years ago. But basically, the concept of race was non-existent 500 years ago. We had to be very, very clear about that. We had to be very, very conscious of the fact that the concept of race comes through a system of imperialism, genocide, and mass invasions of the rest of the world. So yes, this concept of biology, of being a fuel of difference, of making a different category for people and humanity, it's a European concept that they created because they, self-identified white people, self-identified Europeans, wanted to step away from, make themselves distinguished from, aside from the rest of the world, whom they were invading at the time that they started developing these concepts of race. That is first and foremost. We all should know that race is a social construct that has nothing to do with our biology. Yes, for those of you who have taken anthropology, for those of you who are interested in archaeology, anthropology shows us that human diversity could be found throughout the world, obviously, but it could also be found throughout one landmass. Nation states and different cultures that came after should not define that. So first and foremost, race is a European construction, a social construction to reinforce notions of white supremacy, to make a logic of who is supreme, who is inferior, and to justify their ideological repression of people and to give it a visual marker to be able to distinguish whom they justifiably oppress and who they justifiably kill and basically remove from lands. So that is a generic process under white supremacy racism. It is a generic process of imperialism and capitalism that we are witnessing and continue to witness. So first and foremost, before I even answer the question about race, I wanted to take that moment to explain to you the history of the concept of race. Europeans came up with this concept of race to justify white supremacy and racial hierarchies in order for them to justify their subjugation, the killings and invasions of people whom they visually saw as different from themselves. Now that we know that, right? Let's get into race. So the categories that are on the census for race are white, Native American, Black, and I believe there's other cultures or other race at the bottom. Myself, as a Mexican, right, constructed by this nation that's known as Mexico, I know the history of my people, of myself. I understand that me as a Mexican, as a native woman of Mexico, obviously I am not what they consider full blood. Obviously, I am considered mixed blood. I do not like the term mestiza. That term mestiza, the way it was produced, the way it was manufactured by the the elitist circles of Mexico. It's a very eugenist approach to Mexican pride. It's a ideology that fuels raza, mestizo, raza cósmica. That whole ideology comes from a eugenist approach to Mexicans. Basically, Jose Vasconcelos, who's the man, the criollo, the Spaniard, who came up with a concept that was made popular in his article called La Raza Cósmica, was talking about controlling population control of not white people, but he wanted to control Black and brown populations. He wanted to, yes, talk about blending and mixing, but he wanted to celebrate the white dominance of Black and brown cultures underneath the white foundation. That is my problem with the term mestizo, with the term raza, and I have a lot more videos about that. So if you guys are interested, please check that out. So going back, right? So I am a Mexican indigenous woman who does not identify with colonial terms like mestizo and raza because they denote and celebrate white supremacy, genocide, and racism against my people. I feel 100% more comfortable marking down Native American, right? So let me explain that. So Mexicans, Central Americans, South Americans, all of us as a whole, right? Those of us that are of indigenous descent, those of us that are indigenous, we have a common experience that came through ancient connections. So before, I'm not even talking about Columbus, I'm not even talking about 1492. I'm talking about a history that connected us thousands and thousands of years. Archaeologists have dated this more than 40,000 years ago. So our history here on this continent, our civilizations, our culture, our development of language, of tools, of all these artifacts came from the experience of us being on this continent for 40,000 years. Excuse me. And so throughout that time, they're all, obviously migrating all over what is now known Mexico, what is now known Central America. So all of us are in this culture, in this continent, and we're developing original civilizations, and this has been proven. So no, we did not come from outer space. No, we did not come from Africa or African civilizations. We've been here for 40,000 years at least, and we developed original civilizations. And you can read a lot more about that and some links I'm going to give you. So we've been here thousands and thousands of years before 1492, before the invasion of our continent. Come the invasion, come the slavery, come the terrorism, come the massive genocide of 95% of our population. Those of us that survived are then oppressed, grouped, and overseen by European colonies, right, that are offshoots of Europe. They then mutate themselves and become nations, start branding and stealing the lands of our people, and they start dividing up the land in accordance to their greed and their imperial interests. Therefore, you get Mexico in 1821. Therefore, you get Central America and other Central American countries in 1823. And so you start seeing this massive development of nations because it comes through the colonial process. That is why the research that I have made, what I have pinpointed, is that nationalism is really an offshoot of the process of white supremacy and the history and politics of that. And so through the creation of Mexico, through the creation of El Salvador or Guatemala, you see indigenous people being labeled, these nations, right, that do not acknowledge the connections, do not acknowledge the cultural connections and relationships that we had for thousands and thousands of years prior to the European invasion of our lands. And so when I look at the US Census and I refuse to call myself Hispanic or Latina, so I am not, even though Mexican is under the category of Latina, I refuse to identify with Latina because it is a colonial hijack of who I am. And who I am is an indigenous person whose existence has been repressed by such identities as Hispanic or Latino. So I go on to the race aspect of the census, and I am 100% much more comfortable putting Native American. And you might ask, okay, well, Native American, but then if you look on the form, it asks you, oh, well, what nation are you from? Or what tribe are you from? And many of us can put down and know exactly what tribe we come from, what nation we belong to. I know plenty of people that can tell you, I come from this region, from this town. I know this is a language. A lot of them still speak their indigenous languages. A lot of them are still intact with who they are. Well, people like myself, I have been displaced from that. I have been disrupted from that connection. And the best thing that I can do and that I can advise for you is, if you happen to be like me, where you're not exactly sure, you understand you're Mexican, you understand you're indigenous, you just don't understand exactly what region or what tribe or what nation you come from, that's okay, right? Not knowing exactly where we come from and pinpointing exactly where we are, that's a journey. That's not a red light to say, oh, well, you can't put indigenous, you must be white then, oh, you're something else, you're mestiza. No, I encourage you, I challenge you, if you're waking up to this knowledge, if you're learning, if you're understanding that you are indigenous, then for myself, I put Nawa, right? Nawa, not Nawat. Nawat is the language. Nawa, Nahua. Nawa means the culture, the people that are speaking the Nawa language. From what I know from the regions where my family's from, the predominant culture there, the linguistic culture, was Nawat. So guess what? That's what I know. That's what I'm finding out in my roots and my family tree. That's what I'm going to put down. So I'm putting down, I'm not Latina or Hispanic. Under race, I am putting Native American, and under tribe union affiliation, I am putting Nawa. I welcome you to look at your family tree. I welcome you to look at it. And you know what? This is a journey. It's a journey. But what I want to tell you is that we can't just bow down and submit and say, oh, well, I don't know what tribe I'm from. I don't know what nation I'm from. Therefore, whatever, I guess I'm white, or whatever, I'm this, I'm that. No, like, we need to really resist these ideas. We need to show unity amongst ourselves, and we need to say, we're still here. We're still on our continent. Yes, a lot of us have been displaced and ripped away from our tribal affiliations and nations, but that doesn't take away our right to assert who we are. It doesn't take away our right to reclaim and be proud of who we are, even if we don't know exactly who we are, exactly pinpointing that actual tribe. And let me tell you what complicates things. Let me tell you, the experience of genocide, it wasn't a unilateral, oh, you were killed, you're done, they're wiped out, they're here, you come from this nation. It wasn't like that. If you study the 5 centuries of disruption of indigenous people, you will see genocide, first and foremost, through starvation, through terrorism, through sexual terrorism, through violence, through slavery. You will also see the massive migrations that took place. And I'm talking about the whole continent. Indigenous people experience this by far at a rapid scale, where, you know, even if you had thousands of years on this town, maybe through the process and experience of slavery, your people were, you know, shipped to Cuba, your people were shipped to Guatemala, even though you've been living in Veracruz or some northern states. like that's what happens in the process of genocide. That's what happens in the process of a system that seeks to exploit, rob, and not honor any of our cultural heritage, any of our relationships as a people prior to the invasion of our lands. So there's a lot of history to that, right? And even though history tries to euphemize it, and Mexican and Central American politics and the whole Eurocentric aspects of nationalism want us to believe that we're all just mixed and we're beautiful, just mixed, and we're a brand new race, and it's a mestizo, we're all just mestizo, let's get over it. No, there is no blend of cultures. It wasn't a marrying of two cultures as they love to put a pink backdrop to that. It wasn't like that. It was an invasion. It was a massive disruption of humanity, a massive disruption of our lives. Like I said, killing of 95% of our population, enslaving the remaining population, and then categorizing, doing inquisition style torments of indigenous people, forbidding us from learning our history, from practicing our traditions. There's so much layers to this history, to this reality, that tonight I just really wanted to address that because I've been getting this question a lot. So these are some of the layers that we need to pull away as we're learning who we are and as we're challenging these state notions, right, of identity. And like I said, the US Census is problematic, right? It's super problematic, but it is a place where we can assert who we are. And yes, and if you are affiliated with your tribe and with your nation and you haven't had that disturbed or disrupted, I think that's beautiful, and you should celebrate that and you should assert that. And those of us, like myself, who have been detribalized, displaced, and disrupted from the connection to my nation and my tribe, I still have the right to assert I am an indigenous person. I still have the right to, in the journey that I have, which is over 20 years, this is what I come to, this is what I'm comfortable with, this is what I'm honoring, and that's my culture, my indigenous culture. And we are still here, and remember that we're not a new race. We existed here thousands and thousands of years before Columbus, before the Spanish invasion. So let's not let ourselves be taken into this ideology that comes really cute and cool packaged in this idea that, oh, we're all just Latinos and we all speak Spanish and we all, no, first and foremost, don't even get me started. Don't even get me started on that. But yes, that's a long answer, but it's important for us to talk about this, especially for those of you who are struggling with this and who are genuinely looking to connect the dots. You're genuinely looking to find the truth of our history. And I wanted to share this because it's important. It's really important. Millions of us are walking around Mexican, Central American descent and heritage and who we are, and we have no idea. We have no idea who we are. We have no idea that we belong on this land, that we share our heritage as indigenous people, that our connections, that our culture, that our languages, we were all connecting, we were all trading before the disruption of that. And yes, I'm not saying, oh, everything was perfect and everyone was in a utopia. That's bullshit too, because we had wars, we had battles, we had justice systems, we had legal systems. It's the way it was in the world. But that does not mean that we cannot honor that and we cannot reclaim that and reassert that, because goddamn, we're still here. So let's honor that. Let's honor the resilience of our ancestors. Let's honor the resilience of ourselves and all of our diverse communities to this day. And I want to encourage you on the US Census, please, if you are indigenous, please do not allow yourself to be categorized by the colonial terms of that are under Hispanic or Latino in the census. Yes, it may feel a little bit awkward for you to put Native American, right, on the under race. But if you study your history and you come to this understanding like I have, I am 100% much more comfortable putting down Native American, American Indian, and then putting the nation that I most associate with at the time, the knowledge that I have, the connection that I have. So With that, this is Citlali from Mexican Excellence. Please don't forget to subscribe, like this video, share it with your friends and family, and please tell me, let me know what other questions you may have. I'm going to try to give you as much resources as possible under this video. I'm also going to link information on the census, and please fill out the census. It's important to fill out the census, but make sure let's try our best to take this as an opportunity to assert who we are and not keep ourselves being erased and belittled by the tools of demographics that really reinforce a notion of erasure of indigenous people. So check it out. Don't forget, I also have a Facebook page. I have an Instagram page. So check it out. I have the links on the banner of my channel. Subscribe, press something for notifications, and I will see you on my next video. Thank you. Tlazokamati. Be safe, everyone. Citlali. Peace out.